My name is Bill Aitchison, and I want to talk about the show Love in a Time of Corona, a performance I directed in 2020. It was a bilingual, online show created across 4 time zones by the group Last Minute Live Art, LMLA, who are based in China. The piece was conceived and created during the first phases of the pandemic. The show, directed from Nanjing, is one in which I was twice placed in a 2-week solitary lockdown during rehearsals, confined to my apartment with no stepping outside. These restrictions informed the show and became something of a rule. The performance was made to be given within domestic spaces to an audience of 1. During the lockdowns, I made group calls, at first merely social video calls to connect with friends from LMLA who were also stranded in various places. These calls became playful and expanded in scope. We started experimenting with the format, passing people along in a chain and with group actions. These calls formalized and gained artistic ambition. Talking to people one-to-one, and also in pairs, it became clear that everyone had unique situations. Struggles, fears, realizations that they had were interesting, even moving, but we still needed a form to contain the work. And looking at the online performances that were starting to take place, they fell into 2 main categories of live streams from the kitchens of celebrity musicians and major venues offering online screenings of their back catalogue. I felt that in both these instances the spectators were relatively passive, and I wanted to recapture some of the presence and unpredictability of live performance, as I felt that interactivity and bodily presence were somehow at the heart of this exchange. That's why I settled upon making performances in the format of one-to-one interactive video calls using phones. Having both performer and spectator visible was an important first step, but it also created a somewhat awkward situation between 2 strangers. That's where I looked into the techniques of pick-up artists who are experts at rapidly creating a bond with a new person. Curiosity, escalation, trust, yes ladders became our staple fodder. Mirroring was another technique we played with, as was making changes of location. The latter creates an accelerated sense of a shared history and ensures the relationship does not get stuck in one mode only, but rather has the potential to evolve. Now, I'm aware that pick-up techniques were developed within a macho and even misogynistic culture, but I also discovered that a good deal of these techniques has much broader utility. They could help shows and, more importantly, performers who were countering dominant narratives, as indeed most of ours were. In this piece I wanted to see how far it was possible to push interactivity and to do so through physical movement. For example, here the performer and spectator navigated their way around their apartments and even onto their beds separately, so the performance in no way felt constrained to being a small immobile screen-based work. It also had a rule of no speaking. When it was essential to use words, a few signs like this were used, the sort of balance between action and words you see in silent movies. These were written in English, simplified and traditional Chinese, depending on who the spectator was. Indeed, most of the pieces were bilingual. All 7 of the solos were distinct and proposed different situations requiring their own rehearsal patterns and performance techniques. This was a more technological piece, for instance, that used projected images. What is perhaps surprising is that they all, more or less, technically worked. Here is an explicitly feminist performance that used the floor as the performance frame. It began with a conversation that moved into action art. Pick-up does not necessarily mean that the performances were light or flirtatious. This was a serious, even confrontational piece about the diminishing opportunities of women. Other topics that the solos touched upon were helplessness, the generational divide, power relations, disability, right-winged armed militias patrolling the streets, depression and recovery. The theme of love, then, was more often an inspiration through its absence than its presence. The show premiered in late April at the Along the Edge Arts Festival run by Chinese University of Hong Kong. The whole festival took place online. This did not give us much time to prepare the show, but the advantage with rehearsing during lockdown was the performers had time on their hands, and this gave a meaningful focus to the experience. The performers were spread across 4 time zones, and the audience more broadly spread still. There were shows on any given day at anything between 9 a.m. and 12 midnight. It was encouraging to see that this was all quite possible to do, even on a limited budget as we were. The shows had an improvised feel, akin to the situation of lockdown. This accentuated the poetics of domestic space. We used bathrooms, bedrooms, kitchens, windows, balconies, front doors, corridors, and learnt to navigate spectators through their spaces, too. Gender, nationality, age and temperament of both performer and spectator all played a major role in determining the dynamic of each performance. It was never the same twice, it was always made with the spectator. We rehearsed some possibilities so that they became used to dealing with a range of people, but real audiences always brought something new. With highly interactive pieces, it was possible to go so far as to turn them into co-creative experiences at times. Trust was gained by being genuinely present as oneself, as this encouraged the spectator to do likewise. One aspect of this was being fully congruent, another important feature of pick-up art. We returned to live space during an exhibition in May 2020 with adjacent room performances. This led me to realise that as the world and us as performance makers move on from COVID, some things have changed and we are not returning to the exact same state as before.